It's not fair. My boyfriend pretended to be asleep on the flight just to spy on me kissing his best friend. You can't trust men. The air in the plane smelled of plastic and burnt coffee, a scent that has always seemed to me like the perfume of false promises. This trip to Cancun was one of them. It was supposed to be our reset, the opportunity for Alex and me to reconnect. But from the moment we sat down, he was already gone. He took out his laptop, put on his huge black headphones, and the outside world, including me, ceased to exist. I was sitting in the middle seat, trapped between him and a stranger who was snoring softly. I felt like an object, another accessory in his carry-on luggage. I could have caught fire in that seat, and he would have only complained about the heat. I watched his fingers typing nonstop, absorbed in some spreadsheet or work email that, of course, couldn't wait. I spoke to him once. I asked him if he wanted some water, and he just raised a hand, a vague gesture that could have meant anything. He didn't even look at me. It was the culmination of months of feeling this way, invisible, months of silent dinners while he answered messages, of nights when he would turn over to sleep without an I love you. And now, on the damn trip that was supposed to fix everything, he was building the same wall as always, only at 30,000 feet. The frustration burned in my throat like acid reflux. Then I saw Hugo a few rows back, wedged next to a woman who was taking up part of his seat. Hugo, Alex's best friend. Hugo, who always looks at me when I talk, who laughs at my jokes, who remembers the little things. We looked at each other over the seats, and he smiled at me. A genuine and warm smile that reached me like a ray of sunshine in the midst of my private storm. He nodded at me, a silent question. Everything okay? I shook my head subtly, a mute confession of my misery. And in that instant an idea blossomed in my mind. A solution so simple and logical that I was surprised I hadn't thought of it before. I stood up feeling bold. I leaned over Alex, who didn't even flinch, and touched the stranger in the aisle on the shoulder. Excuse me, I said with my best smile. Would you mind swapping seats with my friend over there? He can barely fit, and you'd have more space here. The grateful man immediately accepted. Then I went over to Hugo. Switch over here, I whispered. That way you don't have to be squished the whole trip. He seemed to hesitate for a second looking at Alex, but I insisted. Come on, don't be silly. Alex is in his own world anyway. It wasn't a lie. I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was an act of pure and simple kindness. I was taking care of my boyfriend's friend. I was being a good person. If in the process I got someone to talk to so I wouldn't feel like a ghost for the next 4 hours, was that really a crime? I sat down again, this time with Hugo in the aisle seat and Alex still glued to the window, oblivious to everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt a small spark of something like hope. Or maybe it was just the excitement of having a little control. I settled into my seat, a small sigh of relief escaping my lips. Hugo's presence next to me was completely different from Alex's. It was an active, warm presence. It wasn't just about having a body next to you, but about feeling that that body housed a person who registered you, who saw you. He asked me quietly how I really was, and his eyes didn't leave mine as I answered him. I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to dissipate. It was incredible how a simple act of attention could change everything. Alex, for his part, continued typing for another 20 minutes before slamming the laptop shut. Without a word, he reclined, rested his head against the window and closed his eyes. Not a good night, not a do you need anything? He just disconnected. He left me alone, sitting next to his best friend on a plane that was supposed to take us to our personal paradise, but his paradise was clearly a place where I was not invited. And as the cabin darkened and the engine's hum enveloped us, I realized I didn't care. I wasn't alone anymore. With Alex asleep, the atmosphere in our small row of 3 seats changed completely. It was as if his disconnection had given us permission to truly connect. The conversation with Hugo, which had started with polite murmurs, became deeper, more intimate. We talked about everything and nothing, about his frustrations with his job, about my abandoned dream of opening a small art gallery. These were conversations I had tried to have with Alex 1,000 times only to be met with a distracted grunt or a not now I'm busy. Hugo, on the other hand, listened, asked questions, leaned slightly towards me to hear better, and the warmth of his body was a comfort. At some point, a flight attendant came by offering blankets. It was freezing cold in the cabin, and there was only one left. Hugo took it and, without hesitation, spread it over both of us. To share, he said with a knowing smile. The gesture was so natural, so simple, that my heart skipped a beat. It was a small act of care that felt monumental compared to the emptiness emanating from the seat next to me. Our knees brushed under the thin fabric of the blanket. At first it was accidental, a simple product of the lack of space, but then neither of us moved away. It was a constant point of contact, a silent anchor in the darkness of the plane. I took out my headphones to put on some music, to fill the silence, and he leaned in to ask me what I was listening to. When I told him the name of the band, his eyes lit up. "I love them," he whispered. "Play that song, the one that talks about meeting the right person at the wrong time." I offered him one of my earbuds and he put it on. The music filled the small space between us. With my head slightly tilted towards his, sharing the same melody, the world was reduced to the two of us. I could smell his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something else, something warm and masculine. I felt the rhythm of the music and underneath it all the steady rhythm of my own heart beating faster than normal. This wasn't cheating, this was finding refuge. It was simply human to seek warmth when you are being left to die of cold. Every shared quiet laugh, every look that lingered a second longer than necessary, was like adding a small piece to a huge mosaic that was beginning to take shape. A mosaic that showed a picture of how things could be, how they should be. I was rediscovering a part of myself I thought I had lost. The girl who liked to be listened to, who lit up with an intelligent conversation, who felt alive with a real connection. Alex hadn't killed that girl. He had simply buried her under layers and layers of indifference. And Hugo, with every kind word and every considerate gesture, was digging her out. I didn't think about Alex. Why should I? He had removed himself from the equation. He was sleeping or pretending to sleep in his own private universe. It wasn't my fault that someone else was willing to occupy the space he had so disdainfully left vacant. The responsibility of holding a relationship together belongs to two people, and he had let go of his end of the rope a long time ago. I was just trying to avoid falling into the void. It wasn't betrayal, it was survival. The movie they showed on the plane screens was a silly romantic comedy, but we watched it together, commenting in whispers. There was a particularly cheesy scene where the protagonist tells the girl, "I've waited my whole life to find you." Hugo turned to me in the darkness with the blue light of the screen illuminating his features and said in a very low voice, "How lucky some people are." And in that moment, the blanket, the brushing knees, the shared music, it all fit. We weren't just flirting, we were acknowledging an unspoken truth, a truth that floated between us, as real as the plane that was carrying us through the night. The cabin lights were now almost completely off, leaving only a few points of light that created an intimate, almost unreal atmosphere. The rest of the passengers were sleeping or watching their movies in a collective silence. The world had shrunk to our small row, to the blanket that covered us, to the earbud we still shared. The conversation had died down, leaving a comfortable silence, charged with everything that had not been said. I could feel Hugo's gaze on me, even when I was looking straight ahead. That's when he leaned in even closer, his warm breath brushing my ear. "You know," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "You deserve for someone to truly listen to you. You deserve to be someone's priority, not an option." Each word was like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted for years. It was absolute validation, the absolution of all my guilty feelings for feeling so lonely, so frustrated. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't asking for too much. Someone else saw it, someone else understood. My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. I turned to look at him, and in the dim light his face was so close to mine that I could count his eyelashes. There was nothing else in the universe at that moment. There was no sleeping boyfriend next to me. There was no reconciliation trip. There were no years of disappointment. There was just him and me, suspended in time and space, connected by an understanding that went beyond words. It was as if my soul had been screaming in an empty room. And suddenly someone had screamed back. I hear you. The movement was slow, almost inevitable, like two planets drawn by a gravitational force they could not fight. I saw his eyes shift from mine to my lips and then back up. There was no conscious decision, no moment of I'm going to do this. It was more of a surrender to what felt like the only right and real thing in a sea of falsehood. If Alex's indifference was a slow death, this felt like an act of resuscitation. And then he kissed me. It was a kiss at first, tentative, a question. And I answered. I answered with all the accumulated loneliness, with all the need to feel desired, with all the silent anger for having been ignored for so long. It wasn't a kiss of wild lust, it was something much deeper. It was a kiss of comfort, of recognition. It was like drinking water after having been dying of thirst. Every second it lasted, I felt a part of me that had been dormant and cold come back to life. In my mind there was nothing wrong with it. It was the logical and natural consequence of Alex's negligence. He had created the void and nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. Hugo and I weren't destroying anything, we were just building something small and beautiful on the ruins of something that was already dead. The kiss was an end and a beginning, all in one. A final stop to a relationship that had ended long before our lips touched and the prologue to something that felt infinitely more genuine. When we pulled apart, we just looked at each other in silence. There was no shame, no regret, just a strange calm, a feeling that things were finally in their place. I rested my head on his shoulder and he put an arm around me, holding me gently. I felt safe, I felt seen, I felt at home. And next to us, Alex's body remained motionless, a statue of ice oblivious to the emotional revolution that had just taken place right beside him. And I didn't feel a shred of guilt. The moment of calm after the kiss lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but it felt like a suspended eternity. Hugo's arm was still around me, a solid, comforting presence. I closed my eyes, savoring that feeling of peace of having finally found a safe harbor. The hum of the plane was like a lullaby, and for a moment I allowed myself to imagine a different future, one filled with this warmth and this understanding. It was a dangerous, but irresistible thought. Suddenly, a small disturbance broke the spell. A subtle movement in the window seat. I didn't pay it any mind at first, probably Alex moving in his sleep. But the movement was deliberate. Slowly, he straightened up in his seat. I opened my eyes just in time to see him take off his headphones with a calm that chilled my blood. There was no surprise on his face, no confusion, no anger, just a bottomless emptiness, as if he were looking through us, through the plane itself. The silence that followed was the loudest I have ever experienced in my life. Hugo removed his arm from around me as if he had been burned, and an abyss a meter wide seemed to open up between us, even though we were still sitting next to each other. The air became thick, impossible to breathe. Every second stretched into torture. I expected yelling, I expected a scene, I expected accusations, I expected anything but that terrifying stillness. And then Alex spoke. His voice was no more than a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a knife of ice. He turned, not to me, but to both of us, with a dead, emotionless gaze, and said, "Are you finished?" The question was not a question, it was a sentence. It was confirmation that he hadn't just woken up. He had been awake the whole time. He had seen everything, he had heard everything. The blanket, the knees, the whispers, the song, the kiss, everything. The bubble of my romantic fantasy didn't deflate, it exploded violently, leaving me naked and exposed in the middle of the rubble. The warmth I had felt turned into a glacial cold that ran from my head to my toes. I looked at Hugo for some kind of support, but his face was a mask of panic and shame. He avoided my gaze, his eyes fixed on the back of the seat in front of him, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. The soulmate who had comforted me a few minutes ago had disappeared, replaced by a terrified coward. The initial shock began to transform into something different, something darker, a budding fury. How dare he? How dare he just sit there, silently watching? That was sick. It was a trap. He wasn't the victim here. I was. He had been spying, enjoying my humiliation, waiting for the perfect moment to drop his cruel and calculated comment. My brain, in a desperate act of self-preservation, began to rewrite the narrative at a dizzying speed. The rest of the flight, the remaining 2 hours, were a silent hell. None of the three of us uttered another word. I sat rigidly staring ahead, feeling the weight of both of their gazes, even though neither was looking at me. Hugo's warmth had become a toxic radiation, and Alex's cold indifference had transformed into a heavy, judgmental presence. We landed in Cancun, the supposed paradise, but I knew I had just landed in the ruins of my life, and it was all his fault, for spying, for setting a trap, for being so cruel. The journey from the airport to the hotel was a continuation of the silent torture. Alex sat in the front passenger seat of the taxi, Hugo and I in the back, as far apart as the space allowed. The Cancun sun poured through the windows, but inside the car a glacial darkness reigned. Alex gave directions to the driver in a monotonous voice, as if he were organizing a funeral. Hugo stared out the window, pretending an inordinate interest in the palm trees. And I stewed in my own juice of indignation and panic. We arrived at the hotel, a luxury resort with an impressive entrance that under other circumstances would have taken my breath away. Now it just seemed obscene. Alex handled the check-in with robotic efficiency. They gave him 2 key cards for our suite. He took one, turned to me, put the other in my hand without our fingers touching and said, "Hugo, your room is in the other wing. You know the number." And without another word, he headed for the elevators. The way he separated us, the way he handed me that key was not an act of normality, it was an act of amputation. Inside the suite, the silence was even more oppressive. It was a beautiful place, with views of the turquoise sea, but it felt like a cell. He left his suitcase by the bed and, to my horror, opened mine and put it at the foot of the bed. Then he took his own empty suitcase from the closet and began to take his clothes out of the closet and drawers, folding them with methodical and terrifying precision. He wasn't going to stay, he was going to pack his bags and leave. The reality of the situation hit me with the force of a wave. "Alex, stop," I said, my voice trembling. "We have to talk about this. You can't just leave like this." He didn't stop. He continued folding a shirt as if he hadn't heard me. "Alex," I screamed, my voice breaking. "You're not going to say anything. You're going to treat me like this, as if I don't exist." He stopped, put the shirt on the bed, turned slowly towards me and looked at me. And for the first time I saw something in his eyes besides emptiness. It was a deep, deep contempt. That's when the dam broke. My fear and my shred of guilt were swept away by a tsunami of self-justification. The best defense is a good offense, right? This is your fault. I spat the words, my accusing finger trembling in the air. You were awake the whole damn time. You just sat there listening, watching what kind of sick person does that. You set me up. You wanted this to happen, didn't you? It gave you a perfect excuse to leave me. My monologue became more and more frantic. I threw at him all the months of frustration, every silent dinner, every night he had turned his back on me. You've been ignoring me for a year. You've made me feel invisible, stupid, lonely. What did you expect to happen? That I would just sit next to you like a loyal puppy while you disconnected from the world? I hate you. I hate you for doing this to me, for pushing me to this, and above all, I hate you for enjoying my downfall. I was crying, but they were tears of rage, not sadness. He listened to my entire speech without interrupting, his expression impassive. When I finished, breathless and sobbing, there was a long silence. Then, with a calm that completely disarmed me, he picked up the shirt he had left on the bed, put it in the suitcase, and closed it. "You're right," he said softly. "It was a mistake to come here." He picked up his suitcase, walked to the door, opened it, and, before leaving, he turned one last time. "Keep the vacation, you've earned it." The door closed with a soft click and the sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. I was left there in the middle of that paradise suite, completely alone, but in my mind the narrative was clear and consolidated. He was the villain. He was the sadistic manipulator who had orchestrated my own downfall. I hadn't made a mistake, I had been a victim, and I clung to that idea with all my strength because the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. Popular Reddit comments on the main story. Anonymous User 1. Wow, OP, you have to understand that the problem isn't that he pretended to be asleep. The The problem is that you kissed his best friend, literally inches away from him. Blaming him for how he reacted to your betrayal is incredible mental gymnastics. He didn't push you into anything. You made a decision, and now you don't want to face the consequences. OP's reply: you don't understand anything. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the result of months to years of emotional neglect. Was I supposed to just sit there withering away while he lived in his own world? His pretending wasn't a reaction, it was an action. It was a deliberate and cruel trap. He wanted an excuse to be the victim and paint me as the bad guy. And boy did he succeed. It's easy to judge from the outside when you haven't felt what it's like to be a ghost in your own relationship. Anonymous user 2. The part that strikes me the most is how you describe Hugo as a soulmate one moment and a terrified coward the next. Don't you see that your perception of people changes drastically depending on whether they are validating you or not? Hugo was not your savior, he was an opportunist. And Alex is not a monster for not wanting to be with someone who cheated on him to his face. OP's reply: of course my perception changed because he changed on the plane. He was the only person who truly saw me. He gave me in 5 minutes the connection that Alex denied me for years. But as soon as Alex discovered us, he chickened out. He showed that his courage only existed in the dark. It's not my fault he turned out to be a fraud. And please, Alex is not a saint. His cruelty was much more silent and calculated than mine. Anonymous user 3OP, can you honestly say that if Alex hadn't pretended to be asleep and had been awake talking to you and paying attention to you, none of this would have happened? Because if the answer is yes, then your whole argument is based on justifying a bad decision by blaming the person you hurt. OP's reply: that's a loaded question. It's like asking if a fire would have started if there hadn't been a drought. The drought was the problem. Alex's indifference was the drought of our relationship. He created an environment where any spark could cause a disaster. Yes, I was the spark. I don't deny it, but he spent years piling up the dry tinder around me. You can't just blame the match for the forest fire. Update 1. 2 weeks have passed. 2 weeks since the door to that hotel suite closed and left me in a paradise that felt like hell. I stayed for 2 days wandering around the resort like a ghost, unable to enjoy anything. The sun burned me, the sound of the waves irritated me, and seeing other happy couples turned my stomach. I finally changed my flight and came back home, to our apartment, which now felt strangely empty and huge. Alex had taken all his things. There wasn't a single lost sock or toothbrush left, as if he had never existed. Of course, he has blocked me from everywhere. Calls, messages, social media. It's a wall of digital silence. It's his usual tactic, the silent treatment, only this time on a much larger scale. It's his way of punishing, of controlling the narrative by making me disappear. What I didn't expect, what has really hurt me is Hugo's silence. I sent him a flood of messages the first few days. At first I was worried, then angry. I finally received a single, pathetic reply. I'm so sorry. This is a disaster. I need space. And that's it, he's gone. Just like Alex. Now I see things with a frightening clarity. Hugo isn't scared because of what we did. He's terrified of Alex. Alex must have some kind of hold over him, something I didn't know about. I always thought their friendship was strange, almost unbalanced. Alex was always the leader, the dominant one. Hugo was always the loyal follower. Now I'm convinced that Alex has threatened or manipulated him to stay away from me. It's the only logical explanation. Why else would the man who called me his potential soulmate disappear? It's clear that Alex is not only punishing me, but he is also isolating the only person who witnessed his cruelty. The social isolation has been brutal. Our mutual friends have turned their backs on me. I've received a couple of cold messages from friends who were supposedly mine, something along the lines of, "We heard what happened. I hope you're okay, but we need to take some distance." Take distance from what? From the truth. They are such hypocrites. They've seen Alex for years. They've seen how he ignored me at dinners, how he minimized my achievements. But of course, it's easier to side with the patient saint than with the hysterical woman who finally broke. They don't understand silent toxicity, the kind of emotional abuse that doesn't leave bruises. My theory about the trip has solidified. It's no longer a suspicion, it's a certainty. Alex planned everything. He knew about my closeness with Hugo. He was probably jealous of our connection, that I had someone I could really talk to. So he arranged this trip, this perfect scenario. He sat us together on the plane on purpose. He pretended to be asleep. It was a sadistic test, a laboratory experiment to see how far I would go. He wanted to trap me. He wanted to have an irrefutable reason to leave me and make himself look like the martyr. And I, stupid me, fell headfirst into his trap. I don't regret the kiss. I regret being so naive. The kiss was the only real thing that happened on that plane. It was a moment of genuine human connection in the midst of a carefully orchestrated theater of cruelty. My only mistake was not kissing Hugo. My mistake was underestimating how far Alex would go to destroy me. But I'm not going to let him sink me. If he wants to paint me as the villain, let him. I know the truth. I know I was the victim of a much darker and more twisted plot than anyone wants to believe. Popular Reddit comments on the update. 1. Anonymous user 4OP. This conspiracy theory is worrying. You are building an incredibly complex narrative to avoid the simple truth. You cheated on your boyfriend and he left you. To say that he planned for you to kiss his best friend is absurd. You're giving him an almost superhuman power and ability to manipulate so you don't have to take your own responsibility. OP's reply. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's reading the signs. People like Alex don't do anything by accident. Everything is calculated. His silence, his distance, his behavior on the plane, it all fits perfectly. It's easier for you to call me crazy than to accept that people like that exist. I lived with him. I know what he's capable of. You're not listening to me, you're just judging me with your simplistic view of the world. Anonymous user 5. The saddest thing of all is that you really believe Hugo sees you as a soulmate. He sent you a message of "I need space" and disappeared. That is the universal action of someone who knows they messed up and wants nothing to do with the consequences. He is not being manipulated by Alex. He is running away from you and the disaster he helped create. OP's reply. Or maybe he's running away because he's scared. Have you thought of that? Maybe Alex said something to him, threatened to tell some secret of his or something like that. It's incredible how you all assume the simplest version that makes me look the worst. Hugo and I had a real connection. You can't fake something like that. What happened afterwards was the result of Alex's interference, not the lack of sincerity of our feelings. Anonymous user 6. Every time you write you dig yourself deeper. You've gone from "he ignored me." He orchestrated a CIA-level plot to trap me. Don't you realize that by making Alex an evil genius, you're admitting you have no control over your own actions? If he can make you kiss someone, then you have no free will. Think about it. OP's reply. I'm not saying he made me kiss Hugo. I'm saying he created the perfect conditions for it to happen knowing it would happen. It's like leaving a piece of meat in front of a hungry lion and then blaming the lion for eating it. He emotionally starved me for years and then put the feast in front of me. He didn't control me, he psychologically manipulated me. There's a big difference and I'm tired of people not seeing it. Final update. A month has passed. The silence has become a constant in my life. The apartment creaks at night and every sound makes me jump. I've been living in a kind of limbo, replaying the story in my head over and over, finding more and more evidence to support my theory each time. I had completely convinced myself. I was the victim of a master plan. But last night, everything changed. I received an email. It wasn't from Alex, it was from Hugo. It was long and it destroyed everything. It started with 1,000 apologies. He said he had been a coward, that he should have spoken to me sooner, but that he didn't know how. He explained that he had finally spoken to Alex, that they had met a few days ago to close things out. I thought the email was going to confirm my suspicions, that he would tell me how Alex had threatened him, but it didn't. He told me the truth, and the truth is much crueler than any conspiracy I could have imagined. The reason Alex was so distant on the plane, so absorbed in his laptop, had nothing to do with me. Just before we boarded, while I was buying a magazine, he received a call from his father. His mother's cancer, which had been in remission for 2 years, had returned and it had returned aggressively. Metastasis in the liver and lungs. The doctors gave her a few months at most. He was in a state of shock the entire flight. He wasn't working. He was looking for emergency flights to return from Cancun, trying to figure out how to tell me without ruining my trip from the first minute. He put on his headphones and closed his eyes, not to ignore me, but so that I wouldn't see him cry. He didn't pretend to be asleep to spy on me. He was trying to contain a pain so immense that it threatened to break him into pieces. And I was next to him complaining that he wasn't paying attention to me. Hugo's email detailed the conversation with a completely broken Alex, who told him that the moment he saw us kiss, something inside him simply shut off. He didn't feel anger, just an absolute emptiness, as if the universe was telling him that he was completely alone. Reading those words, the floor disappeared from under my feet. Every one of my justifications, every piece of my victim narrative shattered. There was no plot, no trap, just a man suffering an unimaginable tragedy who was betrayed in the most intimate and cruel way at his moment of greatest vulnerability. Guilt hit me with the force of a freight train, leaving me breathless, suffocating me. I realized the monstrosity of my actions, of my words, of my accusations. I was the villain, I was the manipulator, I was the cruel person. But then, as tears of shame ran down my face, another feeling began to emerge, an ugly and twisted one, an ember of resentment that refused to be extinguished. Why didn't he tell me? If he loved me so much, if we were a team, why was his first instinct to hide something so monumental from me? He excluded me at the most important moment of his life. He decided that I was not part of it. He treated me like a stranger, like a burden to be protected from bad news. And that little ember began to grow. Yes, what I did was terrible, unforgivable, but he pushed me to it not with an evil plan, but with his secrecy, with his inability to trust me, to lean on me. He left me alone in the dark, not knowing that he was in an even greater darkness. And in that mutual loneliness, I looked for a light, any light. His pain did not give him the right to isolate himself. His tragedy does not cancel out my loneliness. In the end, it all comes back to the same thing. He built a wall between us. The fact that it was made of bricks of pain instead of indifference doesn't change the fact that the wall was there and I was on the other side alone. Popular Reddit comments on the final update. Anonymous User 7. Oh my god. OP, this is your chance. The only way out of this is total humility. What you did to him, given the circumstances, is devastating. There is no justification. Your only way forward is to fully accept the magnitude of your mistake, seek help, and leave this man alone so he can mourn his mother. Anything else makes you a real villain. OP's reply. Humility. And what about him? Where is his responsibility for not trusting the person who is supposed to be his life partner? Love is about sharing burdens, not hiding them. He treated me like a child. Suffering doesn't give you a free pass to exclude your partner. What I did was wrong, I know it. I feel it in every bone of my body. But it wasn't an act created in a vacuum. It was a reaction to a wall he put up first. Anonymous User 8. I am speechless. You managed to find out that your boyfriend was discovering his mother was dying while you were cheating on him, and somehow you've turned it around again to be his fault. This is a level of self-deception that needs professional help. You are the ultimate martyr. Nothing is ever your fault. OP's reply. I'm not saying it's not my fault. I'm saying the blame is shared. Is that so hard to understand? A relationship is a system. An action causes a reaction. His secrecy was an action, my kiss was a reaction. Both were wrong, but people here only want to focus on mine because it's more dramatic, more obvious. Nobody wants to talk about the silent betrayal that is not trusting your partner in their worst moment. Anonymous User 9OP, please, read your last sentence again. His tragedy does not cancel out my loneliness. That sentence sums up your entire problem. You were so consumed by your own needs and your own sense of abandonment that someone else's real and devastating tragedy became a mere inconvenience to your narrative. He lost his mother and his girlfriend on the same day. You lost a boyfriend who, according to you, no longer loved you. It's not the same. OP's reply. Maybe it's not the same, but my pain was also real. My loneliness was real. People suffer in different ways. You can't compare pain as if it were a competition. The fact is he left me emotionally alone long before his mother got sick, and when she got sick, he simply did it physically as well. I don't know what else to say. I'm devastated for him, for his mother, for everything.